The New Quantum Era,
a podcast
by Sebastian Hassinger
and Kevin Roney.
Well, welcome back. Hey, it's Kevin. We've decided, me and Sebastian, for our next episode here to delve into essentially a retrospective of the past year or so of this journey of the new quantum era. What we're trying to do in this episode is just do a little commentary, a little highlighting of key events that we've seen appear here, and I hope inform not just people who are interested in the science and the experimental outcomes, but also in terms of the engineering and even perhaps economic eventual potential here. I think we've got a hold of some threads of that conversation that deepen the dialogue and perhaps reveal new trends and new themes going forward for our podcast. So yeah, Sebastian, I think that's the overview. What do you think? I mean,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I thought when you raised this idea, Kevin, I thought it was a really good idea for a couple reasons. One, we just had a hiatus that was a little longer than we'd anticipated.
Well, yeah.
And so I thought providing some context for that and sort of resetting our listeners' sort of expectations would be a good idea. But also, the last year has been quite a monumental one for quantum computing. I think we both have felt like there's some significant shifts in the type of work that we're seeing, the type of progress we're seeing from the field. And especially with Professor Vuletic last week, that episode really, I mean, he used the words, the beginning of the era of the logical qubit, and it really triggered something for us that touched that sort of sense of like, something is shifting, and it felt like a good time to sort of give an overview of that and talk a little bit about how our focus is going to shift going forward.
It does feel like it's kind of a big deal what's been happening here, and we want to acknowledge, right? I mean, you'd have to be not paying attention at all to see there's a rising, of course, tide of skepticism, right, about what quantum computing could be and whether or not it will deliver. And of course, these storms of fashionable technologies like ebb and flow back and forth across Silicon Valley, where we're both based. You see these trends all the time. The skepticism is warranted. However, I mean, this does feel like there is actually little glints of hope here rising from some of these new events that we're going to cover in the overview today.
I agree. There was this growing tide of skepticism over the past year, in part because of the rise of generative AI. It really took a lot of the oxygen out of the room in R&D focus in large enterprise and startup funding and all the other sources of fuel for innovation. And also, as you pointed out, started to really provide some significant results for the deep learning kind of approaches to chemistry and biology that cast doubts on quantum's ability to keep up.
Yeah, it feels like a lot of practitioners of science that need or could potentially need quantum rigs to perhaps significantly advance their trade aren't really paying all that close attention right now to what's happening in quantum computing, because they see, the classical methods keep making advances, seem suitable to task, and there's a whole new vocabulary, of capabilities to address those same problems using, transformers and related advances that they appear to be on the verge of revolutionizing at least some aspect, of the tradecraft of these highly specific technical domains.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, I mean it's interesting. That's a point that Aronson makes in blog posts and in conversation quite often. That it's a in a sense there's a quantum classical arms race, right? Every time there's some sort of breakthrough, or apparent breakthrough in a quantum algorithm or a technique, there's an opportunity for the classical world to go, oh, that's interesting. We can do that, but better or faster or whatever, right? There's a
Yes.
catch up that happens.
Yes.
So there's a kind of continue, which, by the way, is great for everybody, right?
Yes, it really is. But I really appreciate his sober-minded
Yeah,
perspective. That both he's showing the skepticism, he's raising all of our standards with respect to how we evaluate and appraise, right, the merit of a given advance, an algorithm, a given piece of hardware. But also, I mean, a guy like that, he's not just spouting bitter cynicism.
no, no,
I mean, he actually is a believer, right, in the future
absolutely,
of this entire domain. So that's
yeah,
that for us feels like a refreshing perspective, right?
yeah,
Embracing what could be while still holding back on running down the path of some rando marketing.
that's right.
Yeah,
The NFT scenario.
yeah, exactly. Web3 baloney. Yeah,
So yeah, I mean, when we look back at the last year, in addition to those sort of maybe more skeptical or negative or pessimistic trends or thoughts, there were a number of sort of positive notes as well. And in particular, one of the things I've noticed is, and I've been talking about it a lot in the last year, is that as the potential, there's more constriction on the private sector side, but it's been counterbalanced by an increasing investment from the public sector. And in many ways,
yes,
that
yes.
feels very appropriate for this stage of this technology. It still has a lot of work to do in fundamental scientific research. And that historically is done more efficiently or better, more effectively by the public sector. So,
And
there's,
interesting parallel with other, black swan technologies that
yeah,
that seemed to come out of nowhere. The early internet, even early,
right.
chips. There was huge amounts of public subsidy to get those
Absolutely.
launched, and so I'm,
Yeah,
I'm sure there's people that want to, see what private sector can do there. But I mean, also it feels like there's fundamental science to get done here that's
that's right.
still left unexplored.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So there's this global trend of national quantum initiatives that has really picked up steam over the last year. I've seen uh, analysts who sort of track this as saying there's something like 30 to 40 billion dollars globally that's been publicly pledged by these national quantum initiatives. And Canada has a
Man,
national quantum strategy. South Korea has a national quantum strategy. Australia, every country you can think of, pretty much, that has a significant academic research base is now aggregating that community and building either quantum data centers where they're going to incubate and host their own sovereign attempts at building quantum devices, and provide those for the use of their research community,
yeah.
and or bringing in the commercial players in the country to sort of solicit or source problem statements and then pair them up with researchers who can look for potential quantum advantage, sort of algorithmic research, right? So
It's kind of
those
an
two
interesting.
things are happening everywhere.
It's really interesting. I mean, there's a fascinating parallel, or rather a contrast, right, between what's happening here, where there's broad embrace across numerous nation states all over, seeing if they could make sure they're part of a national initiative to embrace the future of quantum computing. But wow, I mean, years and years ago, the onset of TCP/IP and similar protocols. I mean, so
Right.
many other nation states just missed the boat, right?
Yeah.
Additionally, I mean, my gosh, I mean, the cloud computing just swept the
Sure.
landscape here in the U.S. and wow, I mean, many major tech centers around the world, they have nothing on that front. So
Right.
they
Right.
somehow, maybe they were
Well,
traumatized and don't want to miss
yeah.
the
And
next
I
boat.
mean,
Yeah.
I think even more, those are good examples. I think even more close to home here is the classical chip supply chain, right? And we
There
have
you
the
go.
CHIPS Act in the
Yeah.
US now as a way to try to counterbalance the extreme concentration of the supply chain down to two companies.
Yeah, we used to own the entire rig, and then we offshored it. And now we're like, wait a second,
wait a minute. So it seems to me like all these other nations are realizing. For one thing, I think there's a growing realization that the hardware race isn't done. I think maybe a few years ago there was a perception that the current modalities were incrementally going to make it to some sort of fault tolerant quantum computing at scale. And now there's a little bit more doubt about that. So you see in Europe, for example, enormous efforts to get back into or redouble their existing hardware efforts to try to have, sovereign efforts to build realize these devices actually have commercial value, which I think, again, this is all healthy for the entire field, right?
Absolutely.
The more people we have working at this, as you used the term black swan, I think that's a very appropriate description of this market and this technology. So the only rule with black swan kind of scenarios is the more attempts at cracking the code you have, the higher chance you have of actually getting something useful, right?
Yes, yeah. And of course, I mean, every, out of the blue, like marginal engineering event that has not yet entered the public awareness is spun as a black swan. We're trying to acknowledge even that we're vulnerable to that same accusation that, maybe the skeptics are right. Maybe there is a quantum winter heading right at us. But I don't know. I still think some of these trends we've covered in the past year are again firm indicators of future hope.
Yeah. I mean, the other sort of overarching theme this year, we've been riding on this the NISQ era, right? Preskill wrote the paper in I think 2015, I think 16, something like that. It might be off, but anyway, he coined the term NISQ, noisy intermediate scale quantum device.
There you go. Yes.
With his hypothesis was that these devices would be useful in understanding better how to make these devices, which I think certainly is true.
Yes.
There's a proviso in his paper that potentially there might be some kind of commercial value that can be realized from certain techniques like VQE or other variational approaches to getting approximate or heuristic kind of answers by pairing them with classical computing.
That's right.
And that's been a major theme of a lot of ISVs and pilot efforts at the enterprise level, and a lot of exploration's gone on in academia as well.
And we've got more to say, I think, about VQE before we move on, but just maybe a brief tangent for the benefit of the audience. Some of our listeners, VQE is old news. Some are still, appreciating these algorithms. So it's a hybrid classical quantum approach, right? Where it's because of intermediate scale, because of the noisy nature of contemporary quantum computing. What you're doing is setting up classically a state space on a quantum computer, and then using the quantum computer to quickly, in one short computation, solve for the principal eigenvalue, an eigenvector. And then from that, and the feedback classically then keep adjusting the next run of that one, trying to converge towards the best fit solution for that. That was hypothesized to have numerous near-term commercial commercial applications. Yeah. But it appears that our faith there was perhaps a little overeager. I mean, you just told me there was a prominent conference recently where a CEO of one of these quantum computing startups was basically saying VQE is dead. I mean, it feels like there's, at least in some segments of this conversation, now pretty firm skepticism on the merit of that aspect of the NISQ program.
Yeah, I will say, I mean, I think that comment was delivered during a keynote at Q2B Paris last May. I think he was referring to sort of vanilla VQE, because there are, there are sort of new approaches, VQE adapt and other variations on the variational quantum solver.
Right.
And also, frankly, the underlying sort of attempts to both increase the quality of the qubits, so just increasing gate fidelity, decreasing general noise, extending T1 and T2 coherence times, at an engineering level. But then things like, we talked to Misty Wall, the MITIC framework project. I think there's increasing sophistication in the types of error mitigation strategies that can take a noisy environment and extract value from that through statistical means generally. And then, again, like the beyond error mitigation, there's the whole realm of error correction. And creation of logical qubits, which is the path to true fault-tolerant quantum computing, which took significant steps forward in 2023.
I'm so glad that you brought that up, because that I think is one of the key threads, right, that we'd like to focus more on in this dialogue, but also perhaps even going forward, right? I mean, in many of our future podcasts, this particular swath of technologies, engineering, of algorithms related to the robust implementation of logical qubits, that I think that shows a really interesting forward route of the potential towards real expression of commercial quantum advantage within our lifetimes.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
I plan on living a long time. But yeah, I think that's exactly right, Kevin. I mean, it's really, the history of error correction in quantum computing is fascinating in and of itself. Obviously, error correction factored in really strongly to the early days of classical computing, and things like just repeating values for multiple bits to see, did I get 5 of the same value in a row? If I got 1 or 2 different, I would still count the majority as my value. Simple, parity checks and things like that really don't work in a quantum.
Yeah. That's all easy to do when you can easily copy the contents of one register to another. That's
or just look at it.
Exactly right. Yeah, but that'll no cloning theorem from quantum computing. It tells a stern story. There is no quantum circuit, right, that can directly copy from one state psi to a duplicate state psi. So you can't even look at it to to copy it, let alone do any measurement if you want to avoid collapsing.
Yeah. And in fact, when Shor unveiled the factoring algorithm, there was initial sort of shock and awe that he had what he discovered.
That's an amazing thing. Yeah.
And then the immediate response was, that'll never work because you need fault tolerant qubits and you can't error correct qubits.
Which Peter, for a while that was a devastating criticism, right?
Yes.
But then
the same year, though, within a year, Peter published the first error correction algorithm, which is an astounding feat. That was one hell of a year that Shor had.
Perry riposte, no doubt.
Yeah. So the Shor algorithm essentially spread the information out across a number of qubits, and often referred to as like ancillary qubits, so that in aggregate, there were ways to monitor bit flips and phase flips of the original value without affecting the original qubit. So the qubit that value would be continuing even if you had to destroy some of the ancillary qubits and then create those as almost a distributed store of the information, which is a really interesting kind of approach to get around those constraints.
And that very innovation, that sort of whole idea of the ancilla qubit, that's now widely represented in many quantum computing architectures, where there's this whole pool, right, of standalone on the side ancilla qubits that are brought into the mix, used as needed for assistance on error correction, error mitigation, temporary output results, and then you put them back in the pool and reset them and bring them back in. So. Yeah, that was a really important prequel to a huge family of algorithms.
That's right. Yeah, and Shor's error correction approach, it's been modified a bit here and there. There's a Bacon-Shor variation that Dave Bacon contributed to, and I think there's others as well. But that was the basis, I believe, certainly of the demonstration that Ken Brown's group did couple of years ago, I think now, standing up a single logical qubit. And also, I believe in part what Quantinuum did. Those were color codes. So after Bacon-Shor and the Shor approach to error correction, there has been this, as with everything else in quantum, sort of expansion of the varieties and types and approaches to solving the same problem, essentially, to
Yes.
building logical
Yeah.
qubits.
Yeah, and I know you know the history here well. So there's probably there's so much rich intellectual history just in this one thread, right? Of error correction codes, right? There's that whole breakthrough by Kitaev, right, on
That's right.
the toric code, right? I mean, basically quantum circuits interconnected in the shape of a torus, right? A donut. You take essentially a square grid and connect opposite edges, right?
That's right. Yeah, it's actually, if I remember correctly, the original paper that Kitaev wrote was topological information systems. So he introduced the idea of a topological qubit at the same time as the surface code, which is topological mathematics in the form that you just described for error correcting of physical qubits.
So cool. And I guess I think I've got this right. At the time of publication, again, people were just, wow, they regarded it as a fascinating theoretical result. But we were so
probably
far.
Impossible.
Exactly. Just so far from any kind of engineering, right, that would render this as a real world thing. But here we are.
Yeah. So in the last year, the Google team has demonstrated surface codes with a break even, so above the error correction threshold. And then, of course, the Lukin and Vuletic team at MIT and Harvard, we just talked to Vuletic last episode, that was using surface codes as well. So, two huge steps forward for implementing what, as we were saying, was previously thought to be impossible to actually realize physically.
There it is, and both crossing this key threshold, and I guess that's another important, really a foundational element of the whole intellectual history behind this domain is, of course, this profound theorem by Dorit Aronoff. We did that interview with her some months ago, but that key theorem essentially indicating in very rigorous terms the minimum standard of error commission on physical qubits that would, if you can reduce them to a threshold, achieve a ever increasing accuracy of logical qubits.
Right. It boiled down to essentially being able to correct errors faster than they were being generated.
Yes. Yeah. I cringe at my level of rigor in what I just said as the summary of Dorit's fantastic paper. So
yes.
If she's listening, apologies. Yeah.
What really stuck with me was the language she was using sounded almost like phase change. Remember she was saying past a certain point, it's almost like a different form of, and she was talking about information, but it sounded almost like a phase change from one form of matter to another. It was really striking.
That was one of our cooler podcasts, I thought.
It really was. It really was. And of course, there's been, I mentioned color codes. There's also been a variation on the surface code called Gottesman, Kitaev, Preskill, who another guest of ours, John Preskill, contributed to. Mm-hmm. And then more recently, again, another big step forward in the last few years, but in terms of realizing this, was LDPC, or low density parity codes, used in a quantum setting, which these go back to 1960 and were originally proposed for use on noisy communication channels. And as I understand, it's iteratively encoding and decoding. So it's almost nested parity checks, essentially, in a classical setting. But a number of years ago, Sergey Bravi, who's at IBM Research, started looking at applying them to quantum information. And this past year in late summer, I think it was either July or August, they posted a paper to the archive, the IBM research team, led by Bravi, about using LDPC on a biplanar chip, so two physical chips bonded together with a total of 288 physical qubits, resulting in 12 logical qubits, which is quite what was interesting to me was, it was a very nice ratio. That ratio of 288 to 12 is quite a bit better than other superconducting implementations of surface code, which are typically in the, maybe an order of magnitude higher in terms of physical qubits to
And
logical qubits.
was it for equivalent error rate or?
It's distance 12, so pretty substantial, pretty robust. And the other thing was how much, for a theory paper, how much it described what the physical implementation might be. They described the chip topology to a certain degree of detail, which made me think that probably the fab at
they're talking to a
Yorktown
fab
Heights
right now, yeah,
is working on this right now, which is exciting.
Yes.
That's great, because a lot of these, over the years, as you said before, a lot of these have been theoretical proposals without any real path stipulated for a physical manifestation. So it's nice seeing a breakthrough paper that's also saying, and here's how you could do this.
Yes, yeah.
Quite exciting.
Wow, so cool. Yeah. There's this whole pile of results quite recently. So I think that's I'm sure it's clear already. This is the major theme that we want to trace going forward is watching these for new evidence of new jumps forward on the support for these logical qubits.
That's right.
Yeah, leading to higher and higher accuracy, greater and greater T1 and T2 time. Just a lot of interesting room for optimism here.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it's worth mentioning too, revisiting the last episode again with Professor Vuletich, why were we so struck by the result of that paper, which was 48 logical qubits, made out of 280, I think, atoms. The reason is because about 50 qubits is perfect qubits, let's say fault tolerant qubits, is about the limit of what you can classically simulate. So
so we're approaching some sort of like threshold of perceived at least supremacy. Yeah, that's right. It's competition feasible to have a fully entangled matrix of 50 qubits. That's a very challenging classical simulation to run. I acknowledge the errance and skepticism on that one. But wow, it does look like we're about to cross a threshold.
Yeah. Well, and I think the skepticism is warranted just because the paper it's not fully operational logical qubits, right? As Vuletich said, they sort of, they set up the logical qubits and then they were able to measure the error syndrome, but they didn't go through to the next step, which is correct and adjust and continue, right? So it's only step one of a process that's going to need to be iterative and performant, which is still a significant set of challenges.
Yeah, but even with caveats, that was another one of our cooler, I thought, podcast interviews. That was just such a good time. Such interesting results from that team. And I don't know if anybody's listening and seen the little videos online, but to sort of watch the parallel dance of these qubits interacting with these en masse parallel operations of an array of qubits doing a CNOT against another array of qubits. Just amazing stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really cool, and it's also it's another sort of major theme that I want to continue to explore, which is the atom-based systems. We've talked to Dana Anderson from Inflection. We talked to Alex Kiesling. Now we've talked to Professor Vuletich. We've talked about trapped ions with Chiara Decaroli versus the electron-based ones. Let's say the superconducting circuits. It's really fascinating to me that the stability, it seems like the stability of the atom-based systems are giving them sort of a leg up in terms of implementing these longer running or longer, systems are capable of doing longer calculations. Yes. But on the other hand, superconducting has such a clear advantage for, wall clock speed, right?
Sure.
And so resolving that, if you get 100 or 200 logical qubits in a neutral atom array, but you have to, swizzle everything around with tweezers and stuff, is that going to produce a competitive, a performance advantage over classical computing? Or are you going to need the speed of superconducting computing or quantum computing? I'm not sure.
Sure, right. And then still the trapped ions, diamond vacancies. Mm-hmm. There's so many other architectures out there, and I hope we don't sound like we're favoring one thread of research versus another. I think there's some really great active but professional and friendly rivalries between these camps, and so we don't want to like throw shade any one particular direction. I mean, all of these have got immense potential. But it's just great to sort of see these different competing approaches raise the bar for each other, and onward we go.
Well, and I think if it hasn't come across yet, it would be surprising, because I think our listeners know that we share an intense enthusiasm for this space. You were saying, every episode I brought up, you've said, that was another great episode.
I'm not just saying that for marketing. I mean, this is a really good time for me.
No,
I don't know.
Fantastic. I mean, I have enjoyed every single one of the conversations that we've
Ditto, man.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So if we left anybody out in our year-long review, please forgive, because every single one was a joy, to be frank.
Absolutely. So I think that's kind of the overview I was thinking about presenting, Kevin. I mean, I think looking ahead, we're going to continue to try to pick guests who can tell us about their efforts to push that line forward towards
that's right
better and better results, either higher fidelity or larger systems than you can simulate otherwise classically, or potentially ththings that are actually operating faster than you can do classically, or both. And I think that's really exciting for the year ahead.
There it is. I think it's such a gigantic theme, and we will continue to touch on that in the year going forward. I think also you've helped me realize that there's this whole, I think, under-acknowledged trend as well that we'll cover more and more on quantum sensing, right? I mean, could there be, at some point in the near future, brand new breakthrough technologies, the likes of which we can't really conceive of yet, around sensors that use some sort of short quantum computation to come to some really interesting engineering outcomes. So that theme too, I think, is underappreciated within the industry.
I agree. It's funny because I think in large part it's a category that's benefiting from the engineering advances that are primarily seen through the lens of computing. But there's no reason why these devices can't be put to other. I mean, these are incredible quantum technologies generally. So there's bound to be other applications as well.
Well, there it is. So I think that's a good wrap up there. I mean, really, if anybody's listening and they're still, to this day, skeptical, about QC, I think, paying close attention still to this podcast and how there's the fact of numerous national labs making significant commitments in this area, big breakthroughs in the support of logical qubits, numerous research centers that have booted up all over the world. VC dollars still seem to be flowing. Yeah. And still there's that quantum sensor trend that I think is an underappreciated trend. I think across the board, there's many reasons to consider this, to this day, a vibrant, active, and fascinating space.
Absolutely. Now you are marketing for the podcast.
just by natural enthusiasm. I've had a bit too much caffeine this morning.
Me too. So we'll continue to try to crank out episodes every 2 weeks. We've had a couple of hiccups in the past with hiatuses that were extended by either the end of the academic semester or year, which often causes challenges around booking. And also illness. We both got sick in January.
Parallel cases of COVID. Good times.
Down.
Man.
Mine was RSV.
Okay. I didn't know. All right. Yeah.
I'm always a trendsetter. I'm done with COVID.
Moving on.
Yeah. But it also bears mentioning, if anybody would like to be a guest or would like to suggest a guest, I'll put our contact email in the show notes along with all the links of the papers that we referred to on this episode. And we would love to get suggestions from the audience, or even topics.
Sure.
All open to everything.
No doubt.
Awesome. Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you. See you, Ben.
Okay, that's it for this episode of The New Quantum Era, a podcast by Sebastian Hassinger and Kevin Roney. Our cool theme music was composed and played by Omar Costa Hamido. Production work is done by our wonderful team over at Podfi. If you are at all like us and enjoy this rich, deep, and interesting topic, please subscribe to our podcast on whichever platform you may stream from. And even consider, if you like what you've heard today, reviewing us on iTunes and or mentioning us on your preferred social media platforms. We're just trying to get the word out on this fascinating topic and would really appreciate your help spreading the word and building community. Thank you so much for your time.